I was one of those kids who asked a lot of questions. It led me to self-help. It led me into psychotherapy and counseling. Had a client commit suicide, left the field, worked somewhere else, not so sure about all that, ended up back in the field of helping, in the field of psychophysiology. Wow, said all that in under a minute. You don't even need to watch the first video now, right? Unless you want the juicy details. But what I learned is that we really have to objectively look at what we're dealing with, or we're just not going to have the success that we want. And that is because Daniel Amen is a medical doctor out in California, and one of my colleagues actually runs part of his practice. And hey, Jay, if you watch this. And it's very fascinating because Amen's work has been a pioneer in this whole industry and field and pushing all of us forward. And he's found 7 different patterns of ADD. He's found 7 more different, I shouldn't say 7 different, 7 other patterns that tie into anxiety and depression. So when you find these patterns and you can back them up with science, you know, the medical community has to at least acknowledge it. Now, they're pushing back really hard, at least in the Midwest for me. They're not wanting to say that the EEG is worth anything. I went to a concussion seminar, clinic, talk, and asked the guy after. I didn't cause a scene. I behaved myself. I wore duct tape on my mouth. I asked him, I said, hey, are you guys using EEG yet? No, it's not worth anything. Oh, really? Because we can see when the brain slows down a lot. I didn't get into it with them. It's just there's not a unity yet of all of us playing in the same sandbox. We're all using the same truck, the EEG. They're using it for a medical position and we're using it for a clinical. But I need to say that we don't work with a client unless they're medically okay. Meaning if the morphology of the brainwave activity, Greek I know, is not proper and is imbalanced or irregular, it stays in the medical world. But as soon as someone is released and they have a clean bill of health, so to speak, medically, clinically, those excessiveness or the lack of connectivity or overconnectivity of certain brainwaves can lead to behaviors, thoughts, emotions, etc. And that's where we pick up. So if you're struggling with something and you can't think your way out of it, we can help. If you're on a med that's not working for you, we see it every day. How many times do we see people that are medicated with stimulants and they're actually anxious? That's like putting gas on a fire. Well, that's because there's 7 different patterns of ADD, as you now know, and the meds only work for 1 or 2 of them. The average stimulant med, that is. Otherwise, you got to think differently and, you know, kind of go outside the box for answers, or do something more alternative, like neurofeedback or biofeedback, or audiovisual entrainment's another thing. So that's the way that we look at it, is that if you just dig in and look at the actual spot that's causing the problem in the brain, you can understand a little bit more about how to fix it. But if you just go to your normal traditional doctor and chase your symptom, I don't know how beneficial it's going to be, because symptoms overlap and then you don't know which one you're really chasing. Somebody who has trouble focusing and is a little bit irritable and maybe not sleeping that well or impulsive, is that someone that's anxious, or is that someone that has ADHD? You know? The ADHD kid might benefit from calming down from a stimulant. Believe it or not, it actually works in some cases. But if it's the anxiety type of a pattern, it's like putting gas on a fire, like I just said a few minutes ago. You don't know unless you look.